So I just want to let the crowd know who they're now seeing on the television screen. This is James Seaman, Principal and Michigan Studio Director, Fielding Nair International. James Seaman has over 15 years of architectural experience focused entirely on the design of places for learning. He is a well-rounded architect, and his skill at seeing both the big picture and the detail gives him the ability to lead complicated projects. He has managed, planned, and designed numerous innovative schools around the world. James truly straddles between the world of architecture and education. He holds a master's degree in architecture from Lawrence Technological University, a graduate-level certificate in education facility planning through San Diego State University, and is currently studying the relationship between education and the built environment as a PhD student in the Education Psychology and Education Technology program at Michigan State University. His influence extends beyond architecture as he regularly collaborates with educators and students, and he's authored numerous articles about education and 21st century learning and regularly presents at conferences as well as leading community-based visioning and education facility planning projects. He has been advising the Sackville Schools 2020 group for the past 18 years.
Okay, very good. Thank you again for having me here today. My name is James Seaman. I'm with Fielding Nair International, and I'm an architect. I design schools all around the world. The thing that's unique about us is that we take an interdisciplinary approach to designing schools. We also have educators on our team as well. And so really what we find is important is that the education really has to drive the design of a school. We've worked in 47 countries now, all over the world, including Canada. And one thing that we find when we work all over the world is that many schools are really facing the same challenges. And the previous speaker, Greg, really talked about this, that it's really a systems issue, is that we find very innovative teachers out there that are trying to do some amazing things, but they're really hitting roadblocks. They're running into policy issues, they're running into these systems things, and also from a physical standpoint, sometimes literally they're running into walls, that the spaces that they have are really designed around a traditional model of education. And so they're really limited by the space, by the 4 rooms of a classroom. And so our work really is about how to design more innovative school systems that really allow teachers to be able to do very innovative things and very creative things. So why should we change the design of a school? And so really that's kind of the core question here. Why should it physically change? And so one way I like to look at the school building is similar to technology. Okay, so it's like the hardware that runs the software, and the software is all the things, all the activities that are taking place inside a school. And so if the hardware is an old piece of hardware, if it's designed on a model that's 100 years old, and so the traditional model we see a lot is classrooms and corridors. We call them kind of cells and bells is another term we use for them. It's really an old piece of hardware that makes it very difficult when you're trying to do a lot of different things with teaching and learning. So when you're trying to do things such as project-based learning, or trying to do more collaborative approaches, it's hard when teachers are just physically isolated from one another. And so, we really have to think of how the space as a technology could be redesigned in order to support the teaching and learning that is taking place. Really the next question that we have to ask ourselves is, how has learning changed? So, if we understand how has learning changed and what learning is like now, then that allows us to really start to design a school building around, or that fosters the type of activities that you're trying to do. So one thing that we see, if we look just kind of broadly at 20th century learning versus 21st century learning, 20th century learning is very hierarchical, right? It's the teacher at the front of the room kind of disseminating information. 21st century learning is much more network-based, that learning is so much more fluid that you're not just learning from a teacher, you're learning from peers, you're learning online, you're learning by doing. There's so many different ways that that we can learn, and it's much more network. So we've got to think of it totally different than the hierarchical view of the 20th century. So here's a image here you can see kind of on the left here, that's kind of a typical school. And we still see a lot of these schools around the world today where you have rows of desks facing a teaching wall. And so this is very hierarchical. On the right, you see an image that is more geared towards 21st century learning, where it's designed for learning, that it really takes into consideration, what do we really know about learning? What do we believe? What are our values? What are our theories of learning? Another way we can look at this is kind of from a spectrum of these traditional methods from the past to more innovative practices. And as I said before, we see teachers really trying their hardest to do very innovative things, but literally they're really hitting these roadblocks here. So on the left here, you hit the more traditional side. You see the teaching is more solo, more individual. It's more teacher-directed learning that's taking place. Subjects tend to be very segregated, and then it's also very classroom-based. It's the classroom is kind of the module. You assign 25 or 30 students to one classroom. That's the module that we put into place. And administrators are always worrying about how do we timetable to these classrooms. So when we start to move to more innovative practices, we see the teaching becomes not solo as much, but more about team teaching and collaboration. Also, the type of learning is more student-centered. The segregated subject is more about integrated content, so really connecting disciplines to get together, or as Molly was talking about, more of that thematic-based learning or that phenomenon-based learning. And then also, so the classroom, it's more networked, so it's really about a range of spaces now in the school, not just that one room. All learning happens in the one room in the classroom. It really is more networked. It takes into consideration multiple spaces within the school, multiple spaces within the community, and also online, being connected to the global world as well. If we start to break this down into sort of kind of diagrams of how we could think about space with this spectrum being more on the left here, more traditional oriented, really if we were to design a space that's more for individual teaching, it's more teacher-directed, segregated subjects, classroom-based, it really makes sense to isolate learning into these containers, into these boxes, into these identical-sized classrooms, align them along a corridor in a way that corridor is kind of like a conveyor belt, moving people from space to space. So it really becomes, this design would support more of these traditional practices. But if we start to think more of, okay, if we now are trying to do more of these innovative practices, how can the physical design change to allow that or to foster more of those innovative practices? So another way, or as this starts to shift to the right, another way we can start to think about spaces is starting to connect things together. So classrooms can open up to one another. So you can see in the diagram here how these teacher desks are kind of pushed together. There's an opening that can be created between classrooms. So now teachers can team teach. They can work together. They can easily flow between the different spaces here. Also starting to think how to break out of the classroom to using other spaces. So if you are trying to differentiate instruction and have students be doing different things in your classroom, it's very difficult to do in that small box. And so you have to really think outside of that classroom box and think of how do you use the corridor, or how do you use other areas, but also having that supervision or passive supervision of those areas. That way a teacher can kind of monitor and easily flow between those types of spaces. If we move that spectrum all the way to the right now and really think about those more innovative practices, we can really rethink the idea of how a school can be designed, and we can think of it now as a learning community. So rather than it's based on this classroom-based module, we can really think about a team of teachers working together in this community. And so you have now a variety of spaces. And this diagram here, this is not the open plan schools. I know that was a fad back in the 60s and 70s. This is really more about a variety of spaces. There's still classrooms, and so we just have relabeled them into learning studios now. So it's really kind of takes that idea of that, the classroom is such a traditional word in a way, and so it's really about learning. And so really calling them learning studios. So there's still learning studios that are like classroom type spaces, but also having spaces like a learning suite, which is kind of two classroom size spaces that can completely open up to one another. And then having a learning commons that's adjacent to that area, so you can break out into a common area when you're doing more student-directed learning, or students are doing kind of individual activities. That's a great space to kind of break out into, and the teachers teaming can actually kind of roam around that area and help students individually in that space. Also, too, we need to think about active labs, spaces for project-based learning. Another term we see a lot is a maker space, where hands-on learning can take place. Having smaller size rooms, seminar rooms, small group rooms, so that way it really allows for a range of learning activities to take place now. And one important piece of this is a teacher collaboration room. So Molly was talking about that teachers need time for collaboration. Well, we really believe that teachers also need space for collaboration as well. So typically they're assigned their classroom, they own their one classroom, and to work with another teacher, they have to go visit their classroom. Well, having a teacher collaboration room that's dedicated to them, where it's set up in a way that it's kind of almost like a modern office in a sense. They can plan together in that space. So when they have that common time where they can prepare, or do things, they can actually have things that are on display for a while, and they can really use that space as truly as a collaboration type of space. So really, as what we see in this learning community model here is now a real range of activities can take place. And you can see on the spectrum here that it's more geared now towards these things on the right, but the spectrum also is wider. It still doesn't mean that traditional or teacher-directed learning is not important. Sometimes a teacher lecture is still very important, but what we see now is that the time for that, it doesn't mean that during the class that a teacher lesson or teacher-directed lesson is going to take place the entire time. We typically see maybe 5 to 10 minutes of direct instruction, and then it moves into different activities, moves into more student-centered activities where students are doing a variety of different things, and so now this requires different spaces to support all of those different activities to take place. This is an image. This is actually a school in Vancouver, Canada, Norma Rose Point, where this is their teacher collaboration space. And so the teachers have a daily prep time that they use, so they actually have the time where they can collaborate, and they use this. This is where sort of their personal belongings are, their home base, but they're also together here in this space where they can talk and collaborate, brainstorm ideas together about the day, and it really becomes their place. This is right within this learning community, so now they can move out into their classroom spaces, and even throughout the day, they can always kind of touch back into this space to gather a resource. The other thing, too, I was talking about in this more of a learning community model, or having a variety of spaces. This is an image of a school in Brussels, where now multiple activities can really take place. So on the right here, you'll see the classroom. There's a lot of glass and transparency, and that's really critical, so that way a teacher can kind of see what's happening in those common areas. And so a group of students here is collaborating in the commons, and also some students are in the classroom actually working. And another way we can think of this learning community pattern as a pattern is moving from that notion of the classroom, that 1 to 25, to now maybe it's 4 to 100, or it even could be 6 to 150. We try to keep those numbers very small, though. We don't want it to become too big. But when you start to think of it this way, rather than having these 4 kind of identical sized blocks, now you could really rethink this space as now a real range and suite of spaces, and teachers could use these and kind of share and leverage the space to whatever learning activity that they have planned for the students to do. The metaphor that we like to use is, this is developed by Dr. David Thornburg. He talks about the 4 modes or primordial metaphors for learning. He talks about the campfire, which is the kind of the place where you go to learn from the sage or the expert. The watering hole is a place for peer-to-peer learning. That's where you go to kind of talk with one another, to kind of hear the latest gossip. A cave space is where you go to reflect, to kind of think, and that's where you really kind of develop your thoughts, or really develop your thinking around what you've just learned. And then last, life is the space where you go and actually try things out. It's about the authentic learning experiences where you're actually doing things. And so if we think about kind of the spaces that support these kind of overarching modes of learning, they really can come in a range of different ways. So I'm just going to show some examples. So this is an example of a campfire space. So still having that direct instruction is still important. We still see it. Doesn't mean that direct instruction is a bad thing. It just means that it doesn't happen all throughout the class period or all throughout the day. It's just one mode of learning that's taking place. So that's still important that we still have spaces for direct instruction. Also, we can think of a campfire as a larger gathering. So this is a gathering stair in a school that actually connects two levels together, and it really becomes the strong heart of this school where everybody kind of comes together. They do morning announcements with everybody in this space, but this is a very powerful campfire space. Campfire spaces can be very kind of small and intimate. And so this is a school actually from where I live in Detroit, Michigan. And so this campfire is in a common area around a reading tree. And so the students here can gather under this tree and listen to the teacher tell a story. Thinking about watering hole spaces, watering hole, as I mentioned before, it's the peer-to-peer learning. So a common space is a place that really serves as a watering hole. And so a lot of different activities kind of collide and come together in this space. And what it does is it really makes learning visible and transparent. So students learn from one another. They see other students engaged in some activity, and it's just that kind of natural curiosity where they want to go and find out what they're doing. And so a space like this really, we call these kind of hub spaces or heart spaces of a school. They're really kind of essentially buzzing with activities. We see a lot of different classes kind of come together into spaces like this, and a lot of different activities taking place. Another watering hole image, again, this is the school in Vancouver, Norma Rose Point. So this is a common area directly outside of the classroom spaces. So you can kind of see in the right-hand side, that's the door to the classroom. And so the students can easily break out into this space to do more of a self-directed activity. So you can see in this image they're doing individual reading in this activity here. Another watering hole space, which is also a place where you can have one-on-one interaction with a teacher as well. And so again, it really is that kind of peer-to-peer, more conducive of that network type of learning takes place. And then thinking about those cave spaces, we see those physically as kind of smaller scale spaces. It really allows more of that kind of reflection and thinking to take place. And it's also good for more smaller group collaboration as well. This is another image of a cave space. This is a project in Texas, San Antonio, and we actually call it a nest space because this is actually open to the kind of the main entrance to the school, and it perches above it. So they coined this their nest space. Another example of a cave space. And then getting into life spaces, as I mentioned, life space is where you go to, it's more about the hands-on learning, the active learning, authentic learning, where it's really connected to real life examples. And so having spaces for that, where you can actually do projects and do things that are really connected to the real world. This is a maker space, so you can see having these resources and in a school, and there's a lot of powerful tools that the students are using to really build more interdisciplinary projects. So they're really connecting together a lot of kind of multiple threads in order to do something that is very unique and something that they're very passionate about as well. Just another example of a space for life learning. So the last, I guess, kind of point that I'm going to talk about is that really learning drives design. And so this means that you can't design a building and just adapt learning into the building. You really have to think very explicitly about what are your theories of learning. And so Professor Richard Elmore from Harvard he has this quote that he says that the physical environment in which learning occurs should be designed and constructed around powerful learning or powerful theories of learning, rather than requiring that our theories of learning be adapted to fit into obsolete structures. And so, what's really critical is to really ask the question and to think about the answers of, what theories of learning are important to you. And so when we work with our clients around the world, we really engage them in that dialogue. And to do that, it doesn't mean that just the school leadership comes together and talks about, these are going to be our theories of learning and that are going to drive this. It really means you have to get the community involved in this process. You have to get everybody involved. So that means teachers have to be at the table, students, parents, community members, everybody has to be at the table to talk about this and to really discuss what is important to learning, what are their theories of learning, and really be explicit about that. So community engagement is a piece that's very powerful that you cannot forget about at the beginning. And I know in Sackville you've already done a lot of this work already, which is really great. It's a really great start that you have done this already. So it's really about getting people around the table to really talk about their beliefs about learning. And that means too having large groups, having small-scale discussions about this as well, where the community is really engaged in the brainstorming. What is the future of learning going to look like in their community? And then being able to come up with ideas, to brainstorm those ideas, and then share those back to one another. So that way you start to build a real common understanding or a common language around what you believe as a community. So thank you. That was my last part there, and I really appreciate being able to connect in remotely and present.